From the moment the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, the tension became impossible to ignore. "Take that off," he said sharply, his tone cutting through the silence as he pointed toward the nurse standing before him. The room shifted uncomfortably, eyes turning, whispers beginning. But what no one in that courtroom knew was that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a moment that would soon expose a truth powerful enough to shake the authority in that very room. She stood there in her uniform, calm but clearly taken aback. Years of discipline had taught her how to remain composed under pressure, but this felt different. The judge's words weren't just firm, they carried a weight of dismissal, as if her presence alone was being questioned. Yet she didn't argue, she didn't react the way others expected. Instead, she held her ground quietly, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. Inside, however, a storm was building. Not of anger, but of resolve. She knew who she was, and more importantly, she knew what she had done to earn her place there. The courtroom buzzed with unease as the judge continued, his tone unwavering. He saw only what was in front of him, a nurse in a uniform that didn't fit his expectations of the setting. To him, it was a disruption, but to her, that uniform represented years of service, sacrifice, and moments that no one in that room could fully understand. As she listened, memories surfaced, long nights, difficult decisions, lives that depended on her ability to stay strong. None of that was visible here. None of it mattered to the men questioning her. In the back of the room, a man sat quietly, observing everything. Presence was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but his attention was sharp. He watched the exchange with a growing sense of concern. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just the tone, it was the lack of understanding behind it. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the nurse, as if recognizing something others had missed. For now, he remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold. The nurse finally spoke, her voice steady and respectful. She didn't challenge the judge directly, but she made it clear that her presence had purpose. Each word she chose was deliberate, measured, and calm. The courtroom grew quieter as she spoke, her composure creating a contrast to the tension around her. It wasn't defiance, it was confidence. And that confidence began to shift the atmosphere, even if only slightly. People began to look at her differently, not just as someone being questioned, but as someone who understood exactly where she stood. The judge, however, remained firm. Authority had always been his strength, and he wasn't used to being questioned, even indirectly. Yet there was something in her tone that lingered. It wasn't confrontational, but it carried a quiet certainty that unsettled him. He paused for a moment, just long enough for doubt to flicker beneath the surface. Before that moment could pass, the man in the back stood up. His movement was calm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. As he stepped forward, the room seemed to shift once again. There was a presence about him that commanded attention without effort. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush his steps. Yet every eye followed him as he approached. When he spoke, his tone was controlled, but it carried a weight that immediately changed the dynamic in the room. He addressed the nurse first, calling her by a name that few recognized, but she did. Her expression changed instantly, not in fear or surprise, but in recognition. It was a connection that spoke volumes without explanation. Then he turned to the judge, his gaze steady, his words precise. He didn't challenge the authority of the court, but he clarified something far more important, the identity and service of the woman standing before them. The room fell silent as the truth began to unfold. The nurse was not just who she appeared to be in that moment. She carried a history of service, of dedication, of moments where decisions meant the difference between life and loss. The man speaking on her behalf wasn't just a bystander, he was someone who had witnessed that service firsthand. And as he spoke, the weight of his words became undeniable. The judge listened, his expression slowly changing. The certainty that once defined his tone began to fade, replaced by something more reflective. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. He began to understand that the situation was more complex than he had assumed. And with that understanding came a shift, subtle but significant. The nurse remained composed, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. She hadn't needed to prove anything through confrontation. Her actions, her history, and her character spoke for her. And now, with the truth acknowledged, the room saw her differently. Not as someone out of place, but as someone who had always belonged exactly where she stood. As the moment settled, the courtroom returned to its routine, but nothing felt quite the same. The exchange had left an impression, one that would linger long after the day was over. The judge carried a new awareness, the observers carried a new perspective, and the nurse walked forward with the same quiet strength she had always held. What began as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something far more powerful. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about revealing the truth that had always been there. And in that truth, respect replaced assumption, and understanding replaced judgment.